you can nail your next competency-based job interview. And the whole competency-based word has become so much more common in the last number of years. And it frightens lots of people who may not have done a job interview for a while, who may be more accustomed to the traditional style job interview, or who may just be thrown by it, maybe just newly out of college and not sure exactly what this is all about. So we're going to try and demystify it for you in some way, and then also give you tools and tricks you can use to ensure you do a good competency-based job interview in the future. As Ruth said, we're Slino Careers. Our details are there. We'll be sharing everything with you afterwards as well. We work with candidates at all stages of the career cycle, from school leavers right up until a 63-year-old man was the oldest client I had. And would you believe, at 63, he landed the job he wished he'd landed 40 years earlier. And that was good to see. So when you're going for a job interview, there's a huge amount of getting your mindset correct, first of all. Don't become too self-centered. Don't look too much into yourself. The employer has a problem as well. They've got to get someone in there. They've got to get the right person, generally quickly, and make no mistakes. Now, while right now there are quite a few jobs in lots of sectors, employers still can't afford to get it wrong. So don't forget that they're worrying as well. They have, to use the cliche, skin in the game as well. And you should make sure that you do not become too self-centered, and that you aim for what I call a knowledgeable conversation with the interview panel. There'll be mountains of CVs, and maybe 10 get called for interview. Apropos of your CV, you need to be very sharp, very clever, selling yourself to the employer or the recruiter with a CV that highlights your skills that are relevant to the job. And the word relevance is crucial in anything to do with career development. Relevance is more important than chronology. It may be 10 years ago that you did something really relevant to the employer's needs right now. If that's the case, you go back 10 years and highlight that. That's just apropos of CVs. So 10 get called for interview, and you're wondering, well, what exactly is a competency-based interview? And it's their way really of getting the right candidate. You know, they've got a chance here. Interviewing by its nature is a little bit flawed. It's a difficult enough way to employ people, and competency-based interviews have emerged to try and simplify that process to make it a more successful or effective process for interviewers. But as I said, it is causing some consternation. It will cause some consternation if you haven't been accustomed to doing interviews like this before. So they're looking for a number of successful competencies. And how do you get started on figuring out what those competencies are? Well, before any interview, be it competency-based or otherwise, you've got to do the 5 things that are on the screen there now. You've got to read the job spec until your eyes hurt. You've got to talk to someone working in that organization, either now and or previously, okay? You've got to talk to someone working in a similar organization to get some sense from them of where the organization is. You've got to talk to HR if possible, and frequently now you'll see informal inquiries to HR, and you shouldn't be afraid of that, because remember, go back to my earlier slide, the employer has a problem too. If you clarifying with the HR department something relevant about the interview beforehand can help them get the right candidate, they generally haven't got a problem with that. So we need to take away from ourselves that whole sort of feeling of being at the end of a firing squad, that I'm on trial here. You're not now 16 going for a summer job. You're a qualified and or experienced adult who can bring something to this organization. So think about that adult, mature, knowledgeable conversation. And 5, and this is crucial, and our workbook that I'll put in the chat in a couple of moments' time will help you with this. And I'll use a lot of my talk today to talk about that. You've got to prepare your examples. You can't just rock up on the day of the interview and hope that the answers will come to you, that good examples will come into your mind miraculously when the employer asks just the right question. The best man who doesn't prepare and relies on a stiff brandy or 2 or 3 just before the speech tends to flop. Ruth is in broadcasting. Anybody with a broadcasting background will tell you preparation is crucial. There is no shortcut, okay? So what kind of competencies crop up? And here's a list of ones that regularly crop up, but this is a generic list that we have drawn from various job specs and interview outlines. You've got to find which of these from that list or from that are not on those lists, which competencies should you be preparing or to convince the employer about in the interview. So you've got to go through the job spec, talk to people working there, look at the company website, do all your research, and then decide what are the 7 or 8 key competencies they're looking for. In some cases, they will tell you the competencies in the application process or in the call to interview. And that's a great help if they do. However, I would still go beyond that. I would still see what have they not put in there that maybe they should have put in there, because they might spring it on you on the day. I had a client for interview this morning, actually, who said that the competencies they flagged to him didn't come up at all, but other things came up. And I think, thankfully, he was well prepared and was able to adapt his answers. So we can't be sure how the interview is going to go. Even if they tell us how it's going to go, it doesn't necessarily go that way. So preparation is crucial. What are the key competencies, and what examples have you got? What stories, I prefer to use stories generally, what stories have you got that will help you convince them that you have the competencies they're looking for? The other thing I'd say is the candidate who has every competency nailed down, who comes first in every single category, probably hasn't been born yet. So don't be aiming for perfection. You probably will have 1 or 2 little stragglers there in your competency list, and don't be afraid of that in any way. So an interview, and I'm still working on your mindset here. An interview is about that sweet spot in the middle there, where your skills, interests, experience, characteristics, achievements, etc., meet their needs. And almost by default, as candidates, we're better at talking about our skills, achievements, attributes, characteristics, etc., because they're there. Okay, we might be a bit bashful about elaborating on them, but they're within our realm or our compass already. It's when we go to the second part of that intersection there, their needs. When we get into that in a deep way, we can really score extra points. When you start looking at the job from the perspective of the employer, what will the successful candidate look like? And how can I convince them I am that successful candidate? And I'll enter one caveat here. If, having studied the job spec, you feel that you don't have enough of what they're looking for, you probably shouldn't apply for the job or even go for the interview, because it's not good for our morale to be doing interviews when we feel under pressure. So you might think it's good practice, perhaps, but don't be applying for jobs that don't suit you. It's you know, I hear people saying I did 50 interviews or applied for 50 jobs. I would like to look at all 50 applications and see how many times did they apply for jobs that didn't suit them. So anyway, this is the key intersection. What you have, that matters their needs. Must never lose sight of their needs, okay? So how you prepare your answers for competency-based interviews. Some of you may already be aware of an answering model called the STAR method: situation, task, action, result. We in Slino at Careers have modified that to cover situation, task, action, result, and then. And the then is that needs part. It's where I'm not just talking about what I have done to date, I'm now applying that to your specific needs in this role, and I'm applying it in the answer. I'm not relying on clairvoyance. I'm not relying on you hopefully seeing it. I want you to know, therefore I'm telling you. And that's another guiding principle of job interviews as well. If you want them to know, you've got to tell them. It's not a place for smoke signals or nods and winks like you might get around the ring in a local mart, okay? So situation is the first part of your answer, because this is not, there isn't generally an exam to see how well you did in the START method, but it's a tool to help you get through your answers logically. We all are familiar with the interview situation, perhaps in radio, TV, or in a job interview, where all of a sudden we lose our train of thought and we try and rescue it and get it back on track. In an interview, you also need some structure. You need some structure to ensure that you know where you're going next. That every answer follows a kind of a structure that you can get used to. And from interview to interview, you get more and more accomplished at it. So it's not, you're not doing the START method just to pass some mythical exam in the interview. You're doing it to help you navigate the answers. And also the way it's structured, it makes it easy for the interview panel to digest the story you're telling them. Think of their side. They maybe have 6 or 7 people coming at them all day long, talking. They will appreciate whether or not they're consciously aware of it or not. I don't know, but they will appreciate the fact that your stories were easy to follow, easy to understand. So that's what you need to be thinking about here. So the early part of your answer will be the situation. What was the problem or the issue? Okay, I'll come back to that. Or where were you? Where were you? Where were you working at the time? What was your responsibility? Then we come to task. In the specific story, what was required of you. So we're setting the story up now. We're talking here about teamwork, for example. We're setting up the story of where you're working and the task that befell you. And I'll elaborate on this in a moment. And then you go to the next part, which is the action, or actions. And in action, you give the meat of the answer. I was working in such and such a role. My job was to do the following. The following panic arose. I had to respond to ensure that we got back to square one. And here are the actions I took. And the actions can be 3 or 4 or 5 things you did to resolve the problem or to advance the situation. So bear with me a moment. I'll get into this in more detail in a moment. I want to give an overview of the method first. So it's situation, task, action, and then crucially the result. What accrued? What actually resulted from what you did? We got the broadband back up within an hour. We landed that new contract. We cut 25,000 euros a month off our costs. So you had a problem, you set about resolving it, or you had a challenge, you set about resolving it, you took the following actions, and this is the result that accrued, okay? So from a storytelling method, there's a logic to that, okay? And that's the logic that the STAR method tries to give you. And then you go to the then part. So you've told the story, what you did, what you achieved, the result, etc. And now you tell them this can now be translated to, or can be a parallel situation for your company. And then you talk about why what you showed in this competency of teamwork perhaps relates to the company you're now talking to. And this is where you decline to rely on clairvoyance. This is where you get into telling them something that they need to know. And that can be something like, I understand that in your organization, you require teamwork for the following reasons. Boom, boom, boom. If you've done your research, you'll be able to populate that part of the answer as well, okay? So but we'll flesh this out a bit in a moment, but that's the answering method you need to try and achieve. And your preparation will lead you to there, okay? And this is the preparation. I have a workbook actually with all of this in it. What I'll do is I'll put it into the chat at the end of the talk, if that's okay, because I do show it on the screen, and you can use it for future interviews as well, okay? So this is a workbook that prepares just what I've talked about there. So now you're going to talk about, let's say, teamwork. You're going to populate out these boxes here with bullet points. You don't need to write full sentences or narratives. I've done slightly that there in a moment, but you don't need to. The danger of writing out full sentences is that you start to learn things off. You try to remember what was written down on the document you prepared, the workbook you prepared, and that creates a whole other pressure in a job interview. In a job interview, you need to have a general idea what you want to talk about, but you need to still communicate organically. Do not learn off. This is not an English poem you can learn off and recite in your local town hall. It doesn't need to be. You need to be in the room communicating, so we avoid learning off, okay? So that screen shows you what the first, what the workbook helps you to prepare for. So there's one, or 3/4 of the one I've prepared. The next slide will show you the rest of it. So results orientation is the competency. And yes, like you, I don't really like the phrase results orientation, but it appears. Because if you want to find a repository of emerging cliches, the world of job spec writing is where you should go, because that's where they seem to come from. Going forward, taking helicopter view and all of that kind of thing. So, so there's a situation. You're appointed salesperson. Your task was to build up sales by 150K in the region. And this is how you did it, okay? There's 8 or 9 bullet points there. Don't find yourself in an interview trying to remember all 8 or 9. We will forget things. That list is possibly a bit long, but it shows you the kind of thing you might write down. You studied, to capture your actions. You studied the area, you spoke with existing customers, you saw there was a problem with slow delivery of some items, you reassured customers, you asked for referrals, you cold called others, you had a give us a try approach, you ironed out teething problems, you kept a close eye on sales throughout. So those are the actions you took to that you're now saying to the interview panel that show my results orientation. I had a problem, I had a task I needed, I had a position, I had a task I needed to achieve, which is build up the sales. Here's how I did it, okay? And then you go to the result and the then part. In the result, you built great contacts, you earned the trust of the customers, Year one, you built the sales by 180,000 euro, exceeding expectations. If you can, in results, always quantify them. 180,000 euros, 5 new things, 20 new things. So, quantify wherever you can. And you might think it's difficult to quantify, or you can't remember exactly, but you can give a circa figure as well. But 180,000 euros is the most memorable item on that page, because it's something we can get our teeth into. Okay, so that's why you should look to quantify wherever you can. Then we go to the then part. I talked about this earlier on, how you're going to apply this results orientation into this role. Okay, you're looking for someone who's focused on results. I respond well to targets. So implicit in this is it's a target-driven environment. It generally is in a sales world anyway. Okay, I know that relationships lead to sales, but you must allow them. You must make them to lead to sales. You can't just, you have to keep your eye on the ball, as I said there. You've got to make it happen. It doesn't just come by osmosis. Okay, and I enjoy generating sales. Okay, you might put another one in there saying, I know that this is a new territory for you, and you need someone to get results in year one, to build relationships to get results in year two, perhaps. But you need to be clear why what the value of your results orientation is to this company. And you can put in more specific detail there. The more you've done in your research, the more you can put something into them there. Okay, so just to quickly look through that again. Situation, task, action, result, then. That's the START method. And that's the basis of competency-based interviews. Okay, if you are going for an interview, you should have 10 or 12 pages like this created, one for every key competency and one to spare as well. So if there are 7 competencies, you should have 14 of these workbook pages completed. And that's what forms the basis of your preparation. So you feed all of your research into here. Everything must come into some kind of it must fit into these headings that you've created in this workbook, so that you're not inside wondering what will stick, what will fit, what will go. You're saying, when they ask me about results orientation, I know what I'm going to talk about. When they ask me about communication skills, I know what I'm going to talk about. So we're not in there in the interview, as I said earlier, hoping against hope that we remember something. In my experience from talking to candidates, and those times I could corner myself, the problem is you remember it driving home in the car. You need to have your answers ready, at the ready, as opposed to fully ready in the interview itself. So you repeat that process over and over again. Now, also competency-based interviews, they'll ask you probing questions. So what did you learn? Compare this to what others have done. How did others see it? And what would you do differently next time? So this is their way of saying, okay, you've told us a story. Let's see what more we can dig out of this story. It'll also be a way for them to perhaps uncover some untruths in your story. So don't do untruths in your story. They will nibble around it. I sat beside a very experienced interviewer one day, and she was picking at something like you're trying to pick a lock with a long little handle, up on a top window perhaps. And I was getting a little bit frustrated, but the house of cards came crumbling down. She had copped something in the interview candidate, and something the candidate had said that suggested to her they were telling an untruth, and it came crumbling down. Even more so than the interview candidate realized, and they realized they'd been caught out, but in fact it undermined the whole interview. So don't do that. Okay, so get ready to answer probing questions, and there's nothing wrong with what you do differently next time. Our performance is rarely perfect, and we should always be willing to learn, and therefore don't feel like you're incriminating yourself by saying, oh, I should have done something differently. We always try to improve and develop, So here's some ways you populate your interview workbook as well, excuse me, to prepare you for those probing questions, okay? You can see them on the screen. I won't labor the point, but getting ready to be cross-examined, which is why you must pick stories that you're very familiar with. Don't chance your arm, and if it's a story from a few years ago, scribble down the notes, make sure you recall exactly what happened. We forget. Friends of mine remind me of a missing link in stories when we're talking socially all the time. So, yeah, but you forget this part. Oh God, I forgot that part. We forget things. So make sure you're prepared by having your workbook ready as the basis of what you want to tell them on the day, but we're not learning off, okay? Our workbook also will do this for you, and this will be useful in the interview. You don't know exactly where you'll be able to use it all the time. What's your vision for the role? Why should they give you this job? And that should be very specific. You should give me this job because I previously managed a team in the exact same sector, or I worked in retail in that city before. It should be very specific, the reason they should give you this job. We need to get beyond the, I'm versatile and I'm punctual and this and that. All great things. If you were given 30 seconds in the interview, how would you like to tell them? Your vision and the reason they should give you the job. Okay? You should have that at the ready. That whole thing of the elevator pitch. If they could only hear 4 things from me, what would it be? You need to know that before you go in. Not think about it coming home in the car. And once you know it, you then watch for chances to get those points across. They'll probably feed into your stories that you've been preparing in the interview workbook, as we said already. But it's up to you to know that. Do not rely on the interview panel in some way divining your greatness. You've got to serve it up to them. As Brian Kerr, the former Irish soccer manager, said, you've got to self-combust yourself. Okay. So the final point there on that screen is, in preparation for the interview, you need to know the possible weaknesses in your campaign as well. What have you not got? Or maybe equally as importantly, what is it perceived you don't have? What might they perceive that you don't have? Because perception can be reality. So you need to know what areas you might need to address. You mightn't have experience of managing a team in A, which is a key point for the job, but you have managed a team in B. Do you know what I mean? So can you compensate? But you can only know what you need to compensate for when you've done your work here and know where potential or perceived weaknesses for you are. So you prepare that as well. And you then think about, okay, how am I going to get around this? How am I going to, and sometimes you got to say, by the way, I have never used that software programming language. I've never used it, but I've used other ones similar. Or I don't have the second language you had down as preferred or optional or desirable in your job spec. But just because you're missing 1 or 2 things in the job spec does not derail you completely. That's a crucial point. Employers frequently overpopulate the job spec and sometimes frighten people off. If you think you're near enough, I'd go for it, okay? But you need to know where your potential weaknesses might be so you can turn them off. So there's some ways you can get around that, okay? What's your vision? Build good relations, deliver what I promise, create for the long haul, opportunities for expansion. Why are my 3 main reasons? I built a customer base from almost nothing previously. Okay, I know my job is about sales. Everything I do is designed to make a comfort decision for the customer to use us. Total focus on the customer. At the bottom, then, what are the things that might be a problem for you? Okay. Second one, they're building relationships in Zoom instead of face-to-face. It's not insurmountable. You're acknowledging it. You might even say in the interview, most of my experience has been face-to-face. And we're already looking at online programs about building rapport, etc., in an online environment. And if there's anything the company is doing, I'd be first to sign up for that to make sure I can excel in that area. It's no problem admitting learning needs. They know you have them. Don't admit fatal ones that will derail you completely, but don't be afraid to admit, because when we admit learning needs, we show our willingness to learn. And that's crucial. Okay. After an interview, you got to do a recce on how you did, okay? And I've done one there. Just so that the next time you go, you know what you need to work on. What didn't go well the last time? I didn't do well on that area. I should have done better. So the next time, so you take this job interview, you take the lessons from it, and you apply it almost scientifically the next time, saying, that's an area I've got to get better on, either in my preparation, or maybe I need to do some training. And that's one of the great things about going through job interviews. It sort of puts us in the dock, so to speak. We have to learn from them, okay? So don't wait. Okay, kind of questions that come up with competency-based interviews are on the screen there. As you can see, they invite you to tell stories, describe a situation, tell me about a time, give an example. So the workbook we have already gone through prepares you for that. It's about stories. The theory of competency-based interview is that one well-told story transmits the entire story. So for example, you don't need to know that Andrea Bocelli is you don't need to listen to his entire back catalogue to know that Andrea Bocelli is a great singer. One verse, one line, one song will tell you that if he does it well enough. And competency-based interviews like that as well. go in deep on one good example, tell it well, prove the point, and trust that that illustrates the broader competencies. In the more traditional type, we list a lot more. I did this, 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 and this. That's a mile wide. Competency-based interviews are more a mile deep. Okay. So just to recap on this again, we're nearly there in the time, but we've done a lot on this anyway. Okay. START, S-T-A-R-T, situation, task, action, result there. Some quick tips before we finish up. Speak in the first person. Those of a certain age were taught in school to dehumanize our CVs. We shouldn't dehumanize our CVs. We shouldn't dehumanize ourselves. So speak about yourself. You're the person there. You're the reason why you're up for this interview today. Be specific, tell real stories, proper nouns, 180,000 euro, France, software, Salesforce, quantify, give results. Be concise, stay on the right road, a mile deep, not a mile wide. Trust your natural communication style. Don't go on stage. Don't go looking for a language you can't sustain. You'll run out of breath probably. Aim for a knowledgeable chat. You're an adult helping out them to solve their problem. Finish on a positive note in your answers and in the interview. The result must be good. If you have a story where you did everything right in S, T, A, and R, or S, T, and A, but the result didn't work out, don't tell that story. Tell stories where your results are good. And finally, as I've said earlier on, prepare, prepare, prepare. Do not be in there searching for examples you haven't thought of previously. It's a desperate place to be, and it's absolutely unnecessary. You can prepare by preparation and prepare for 75, 80% of what's going to come up. And if you do well in 75 or 80% of an interview, you will have done well, full stop. So thank you very much. I'm going to put the workbook into the chat now, and I'll also put a link to the presentation in the chat as well too. So it'll be there for anybody who wants that. Okay, Ruth, back to you. Thank you.
Great, Liam. Thank you so much. That was fascinating, and thank you for sharing the resource of the workbook. There was a lot of great stuff in there. I loved the one about, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but looking for opportunities to shoehorn in your own bits that you need to shine, yes. Which is very good. Yeah. And admitting that you have some learning needs. I suppose nobody's really looking to hire a robot unless they're actually unless they're actually hiring a robot, but then they'll get a robot. They won't get a person.
Maybe we shouldn't talk about that.
Well, as I've learned today, there's human intelligence is as important as artificial intelligence in some realms. So maybe there's hope. Listen, thank you very much. Remind us again where people can get in contact with you.
So slino@careers.com. We have a team of coaches who work with interview candidates, CV writing, career direction, etc. And we're fully online, so our services are available everywhere.
Great. Listen, thank you very much, Liam, and continued success. It was lovely to get to hear you speak today, and thank you for sharing so freely all of that great knowledge.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Take care. All the best.